Alright, so we got the El Camino up here. We've got the old flywheel out, Flexplate. People call them flywheels. They're actually technically called flex plates because they're just used for cranking the car and holding the torque converter bolted to the engine. But a true flywheel is a straight drive flywheel and not hold clutch friction surfaces on it. Anyway, on all your old school Chevrolet V8s, the bolt pattern on your flywheel is the same. Flywheel, flex plate, whatever you got. But on all small blocks from 265 all the way up to 350, they run an unbalanced flywheel. That is, if that's pre-86. 86 and up, they run a smaller crankshaft flange and counterweighted flywheel. On your big block Chevrolets, a 396 and a 427 and a 366 truck motor all run an unbalanced flywheel. So from 265 to 427, you can run the same flywheel on a Chevrolet V8. A small block 400 runs a flywheel with a weight on it. And a 454 and the factory strokers, the 496 and the 502, they all run a weighted flywheel. Now, this bolt pattern doesn't apply to a 496 or a 502 because it runs a smaller pattern on it, just like the small blocks do whenever they came out. Now, this is a 454 flywheel, so it has the counterbalance on it because it's externally balanced. And if you look at it, you can see where the starter has been hitting the ring gear and the teeth are chewed up. They're not bad, but it's bad enough to where it chewed up the teeth on the starter drive. And so to prevent having any issues, I got a new flex plate and a new starter to go on here. Now, when you go to put a starter on, some Chevrolet V8s will need shimming. And what this is the shim right here, and this looks like an Allen wrench here. This is a tool you use to determine what shim you need and whether you need to use the whole shim or a half shim. The whole shim moves the starter away from the flywheel. A half shim moves it closer to the flywheel. And usually there's directions in the box, but they always don't come with directions. But you stick this between your armature shaft on your starter and your ring gear, and that determines you have to have this much clearance. So you need to use either a half shim or a whole shim, depending on what you need to get to this clearance, which I think is 1/8 of an inch. And that will keep it from making all that racket and tearing a flywheel or a flex plate up. But anyhow, that's a little background on how to set up a Chevrolet V8 starter and information on the flywheels. The beauty part of an old school Chevrolet V8 is that all the motors will bolt to the same transmissions. They all have the same bolt pattern on the bell housing. And then, like I said, all the internally balanced motors, 265 all the way up to 350 and 366 to 427, all run the same flywheel. Now, a bunch of you guys will hear about a 383. A 383 is when you put a 400 stroke flywheel into a 350 block, and it also needs the 400 style flywheel, the balanced flywheel. And then, like I said, the 454 gets a balanced flywheel. So that's the beauty part of interchangeability on Chevrolet V8s. All right, now we're under the El Camino here, and what I've done is I unbolted the transmission and slid it back just enough to get to the flywheel bolts. And so You have to loosen your torque converter bolts and your bell housing bolts, and then your cross member, and you take your drive shaft out and all that stuff, and you slide it back just enough to get to your flywheel bolts, and that way you can get your flywheel out without having to totally remove your transmission. And that keeps it to where, I mean, anybody that's ever done a transmission job knows what kind of pain in the butt it is to get the car high enough off the ground to get the transmission out from underneath of it, but not too high for the transmission jack to go up underneath the transmission and all that alignment and stuff that goes along with it. Well, this is just an easier way to make that happen. So now we're gonna push this flywheel back up in here, and also you'll notice, because this does have a counterweighted flywheel, there's a pin in the hole that's usually left blank on the internally balanced motors. This pin assures that your counterweight goes in the right position, because it matters. So if you ever got a crankshaft that's got a pin on it, that's the easiest way to tell that you have an externally balanced motor. And that means that you have to have a flywheel with a weight on it, and it has to match the motor. You can't put a small block 400 flywheel on a 454 or vice versa. So just make sure that you have the right flywheel or flex plate for your engine. But that pin right there is a guarantee that you have an externally balanced motor, and you need a balanced a weighted flywheel. All right, let's get this thing up in here. All right, so I got the flywheel back in and got 4 of the bolts started in. We'll get the 4th one. These flywheels are tight on the crankshaft flange, so you got to work them a little bit. You really don't want to pull them on with the bolts, but I put the bolts in so I could work it around with my hand and it not pop back off. So we'll get that thing worked on, tighten the bolts up, and then slide the transmission back in and start reassembly. So that's pretty much that part of this. Not a terrible job, especially if, I mean, like I unbolted the drive shaft and just left it in the back of the transmission so I didn't get transmission fluid running out all over everywhere. If you notice on the back of the drive shaft, I taped the universal caps on so they wouldn't fall off and lose my needle bearings. So, and then while we're down here, you can see somebody's put a patch in the floor pan here, which they used a factory patch pan, or a made patch panel, instead of just sticking a piece of metal in here, because it's got the plug in it. So, and the underside of this truck is really in amazing shape, just like the top side. For a 50-year-old vehicle, it's fantastic. I'm very satisfied with the way it looks. I mean, it's really amazing. But I was explaining about the pin in the flywheel for a weighted flywheel, and if you notice, all your holes are evenly spaced around here, and then you got this one hole right here. That's the hole your pin goes in, and that guarantees that your counterweight's in the right place in relation to your crankshaft, and that way your motor will be in balance, because it has to have the weighted flywheel. So that's what we got. So we'll get finished buttoning this up, and then in our next video we'll do the drop spindle disc brake conversion on the front of this thing. I can get it set into the right altitude. So y'all stand by and we'll make it happen shortly. We're rocking along on this thing, trying to get it knocked out pretty quick, and we're getting it. It won't take long now.